Welcome to EENET's podcast series, Inclusive Education, Unheard Stories. I'm the series host, Ayman Qwaider. In this series, we hear from education stakeholders living and working in contexts where learners experience exclusion, marginalization, and oppression. Our guests highlight the challenges learners face and share ideas for how to achieve inclusive and empowering education for everyone. Thank you for joining us for part two of our podcast with Dr. Mohammed Alruzzi. In part one, we discuss Mohammed's personal experiences as a student and a researcher in Gaza, the impact of the Israeli occupation on education, and how we began to react to the almost total destructions of Gaza's education system. In part two, we look at accountability, upholding human rights, and practical options for rebuilding education, and we discuss hopes for future of education in Gaza. I want to bring you back to the question of accountability. From your perspective, what needs to be happen? Like, why, and I understand politics is really important, um, but what needs to happen more in around the organizations that advocate for the right to education, that talk about accountability every single time in their reports? What can be done practically?
I think a lot can be done and should be done, especially in questioning the exceptionality of Israel being the only power that has the right now to break the international law. Just looking at the number of the UN resolution and also the Security Council resolutions, General Assembly and Security Council, we can see that there are not only tens, there are hundreds of the UN resolution in favor of Palestinian independence or Palestinian education, Palestinian self-determination. We have countless number of UN resolutions that have been all violated. Um, being like working with kids and on the question of childhood in Palestine, I came to observe some of the dynamics which happen usually in the international arena around children's rights and around violations. As you know, both of the State of Palestine and Israel are signatories to the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child. And as a result of that, both of the countries or entities submit their periodic reports to the Committee on the Right of the Child based in Geneva. I think every 4 years, sometimes longer. And I was reading this kind of documents just to have an idea about what's happening, how the international institutions, especially UN institutions and convention in particular, have dealt with the question of violation of education in the Palestinian context. And I come to see, like, in many of these documents, Israel wouldn't even name these territories as Palestinian territories. And this was quite revealing, to be honest, that doesn't recognize these entities even to be Palestinians. They would give them different names. They would avoid speaking about Gaza altogether. And when the committee would respond to these reports, they would remind them that you are the occupying power in the international law. You are still the occupier, and you have the responsibility to provide and to protect those children. You cannot violate the international law. I mean, the committee is very clear about reminding Israel about what's going on here and the fact that it is an occupying power, and it has the responsibility as duty bearer to provide protection and education for Palestinian children. Israel would respond and say, this is debatable, this is contestable. We cannot really. It's not us who's responsible for providing for Palestinian children. It is the Palestinian Authority, and this situation leaves Palestinian children in the limbo, basically. That Palestinian Authority lack all tools of sovereignty to protect its, let's say, citizens or population or whatever, and Israel saying, no, it's not our responsibility. We do not care. Although international law has been clear about this is siege, what is happening since 1967 is an occupation as an occupying power, and based on Geneva Conventions, the fourth convention in particular, the occupying power should provide means of life, not to prevent life from happening. Now, what we see completely different level of dismantling and impacting Palestinian life. And I think targeting the educational institution is part of a bigger project. Israel understand the importance of these educational institutions in rebuilding, because if these institutions stay unaffected, it can be a starting point for hope. It can be as a starting point for rebuilding. It can be a starting point for community engagement. And this has been something which Palestinians were used to. Palestinians have resorted to schools as space for organizing, for cultural activities, for coming together, for deciding things. And that's why, even in the context of the first uprising, Israel closed schools. And what educational educators in Palestine did, they start organizing these kind of meetings inside their homes. And Israel at that point banned Palestinians from organizing any educational sittings inside their own homes, just for the neighbors around them. So we can see countless examples of how Israel is trying to prevent hope, make Gaza unlivable place, and trying to make it more difficult for Palestinians to go back to normalcy, whatever normalcy means in that context.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of the right to education and learners go back to their schools and learning spaces, there must be for a ceasefire to happen. And some argue that Palestinians has been living under occupation and blockade, and they've witnessed the unbearable like bombardment and violation of every basic needs. Leave aside their rights over many years, and that there must be a political solution because it's connected to the right to education. And even now, we see how the international community is just not clear how they're going to intervene into this situation that Gaza go through now. Okay, in terms of education, we know that after each bombardment or there is each military campaign that Israel wages, the international education community intervene to provide intervention, let's say, mostly around psychosocial support, the regular kind of intervention, support Ministry of Education. But what we see now is never been witnessed before. The the largest scale bombing campaign, it is unprecedented, and I would be surprised to see if the international community just come back and it's like, oh, let's build back better again, or what they call it, that build back better. From your perspective, and in the context of the massive devastation that we are witnessing in Gaza now, what level of intervention do you believe is required in Gaza moving forward? And one thing, that people would argue that, well, probably more into the psychosocial support, trauma healing, whatever psychological support needs to be incorporated in any learning environment. And here, potentially, we're talking about non-formal education because there will be no formal education given what is happening there. So, drawing from your experience as a co-founder of the Gaza Cinema, and and you've been part of many different informal education, community education initiatives. What can be used? What has been successful for Palestinians over many years of occupation, many years of blockade, and they continue, Palestinians, to provide education in their own communities.
I think there are different levels, and it depends on which stage are we speaking about. For now, it's probably it's too difficult for people to organize and to organize kind of community initiatives focus on education. I'm aware of many youth groups who are trying to work with kids in the refugee camps and trying to um, make their experience less traumatic um, in these contexts. But these are not like a widespread phenomena. Let's say just because now everyone is out of their house, everyone is suffering starvation and threat to their safety, to their survival. And that's why it's really difficult to do much at this stage. But at the same time, it's very important to highlight these kind of violations. I know that probably you and I are very disappointed about the reaction of many international organizations to what is happening. Um, my experience working with many of these humanitarian actors, they would say because we are impartial, we cannot take sides. No one is asking these institutions to take side. It's about being vocal, using the same terms which you have used in other conflicts. It's basically copy paste what you have said in similar occasions, let alone the intensity and the scale of what is happening in the Palestinian context and in the context of Gaza right now. So, although I'm very disappointed, but still I see like organizations should have the capacity at least to ensure that the educational opportunities are not disrupted. Now we are speaking about a total blackout of telecommunication. So even organizing educational opportunities through Zoom or the virtual kind of settings is not really an option. Um, all internet and telecommunication has been cut for several weeks now, and we cannot even speak with our families under these circumstances. So the situation which we had at the time of COVID, I mean, it's quite different now because people weren't under the bombardment, and people's life and survival wasn't threatened to that extent. But of course, after that, I would say it's very important to use the educational spaces as a starting point for bringing people together. People would still need some time to grieve, need some time to process what happened. Still, there are lots of people who cannot identify their relatives. They do not know if their relatives were arrested, killed, if they are under the rubble. It's a difficult moment, and it's really difficult to process what is happening right now. But I think educational spaces and community spaces that were there should be the starting point for rebuilding what is left after this aggression on Gaza. Um, Unfortunately, it means also, I mean, what is happening right now, it means like long-term traumatic experience for children. And a couple of years ago, I did some research with the University of Bath about the meaning of protection in the Palestinian context. And rather than using these definitions of the UNCRC and international law about protection, we were trying to understand what families and communities think about protection. And we came across lots of like testimonies of families and kids about how they think about education, how they think about protection. And it seems, and it was very clear that still people are traumatized by what happened before. I mean, we did this research in 2020 to 2021. And During the year when we conducted that research, another assault in Gaza was taking place, and as a result of that, people were redefining what do we mean by protection if we cannot really protect our kids? What do we mean by protection if our kids cannot go to school safely? What do we mean by protection if our future is not protected? And this is an important aspect of protection that usually is not covered when we are speaking about child protection in its classical term. The protection of the future, the lack of certainty, not knowing what will happen next, just waiting your turn. I mean, these are the kind of terminologies that children and their families were referring to whenever we were speaking about protection. And I think this is very, very important aspect, because without that kind of hope, without thinking about, without having that aspiration, how can you engage meaningfully in a full educational process? I mean, you would always think like, there's no hope. Why I should bother? Why I should do my education? Why I should, work hard? Why I should, So it reflects on many aspects of educational life. Just not having hope. So it's very important to work on these aspects for um, for any educational and any educator in any learning space in the future.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very dire and complex situation in Gaza, and there definitely will be a lot needs to be happening in all front. I suspect, and including the research basically. And as you said, Mohammed, it's really important because it is the scale of destruction in all aspect, whether the loss of a human being, the loss of their civilian infrastructure, including schools, institutions, the loss of the starvation, people dying from thirst, and the trauma that they are going to carry on for many, many, many years in Gaza. The lack of vision how these learning spaces are gonna look like in Gaza, and what needs to be prioritized, or what even education means to them now, and what form of education. These are all existential questions that we will be faced by, in the next months and years in the context of Gaza. But I just want to also, end up with this question to you, Muhammad, and I know it's a very desperate situation, and despair is one of the things that is being weaponized basically for us as Palestinians. What you know, and what is Mahmoud Darwish, the famous Palestinian poet, says, نربي الأمل, we cultivate hope. Um, and I don't want to draw a romanticization picture here about Gaza and its people and the hope itself, but what is your hope? Like, what would you like to see happening? Let's end up with this question.
Thanks, Ayman. I think I hope there will be a day where Palestinians have a chance for practicing their political and civil rights. Unfortunately, Palestinians have been living under occupation and domination for so long. What's happening in Palestine, one way to look at it, and this is the way I see it, is a form of settler colonial project that at the center of it is the logic of eliminating the indigenous Palestinians through assimilation, mass transfer, incarceration, maiming, killing, torture, forced displacement. All of these kind of practices and means are meant to eradicate, to eliminate the Palestinian indigenous, and eliminating their educational space is very key in that project. What I hope personally, that Palestinians kind of have choice and have chance to govern themselves, build their educational spaces, whatever they define and whatever they think about their educational spaces, and be liberated, having an opportunity actually to revitalize their culture, their heritage, which has been under the threat for so many decades under the occupation um, in all of Palestine. What I hope that in the future, Palestinians across their areas of residence, because we're speaking about half of the Palestinians living inside Palestine, half live outside Palestine in refugee camps. What I hope that one day Palestinians would have uh, the opportunity to build educational systems that go across these countries, because I think what has happened to Palestine, what is still happening to Palestinians is incomprehensible, to be honest. I mean, I keep thinking about, like, really, can it happen? Can targeting a shelter, you know, go on and on, targeting a hospital, all of this? So to be honest, I'm not very optimistic about the future, but I hope really that dramatic change take place and Palestinians finally enjoy a moment of life and rebuilding. I know from previous experience, Palestinians would rebuild, would regroup, would rethink, but I think we should try to cultivate and build in hope, because this is what we need right now. Everyone feeling desperate. It's the end of the time, and situation is really tough. And I think we need to put our energy as educators to focus on giving hope without romanticization. I think we need this kind of hope to keep us going, to keep us moving, and to kind of and make us aware of our kind of strength as Palestinians, what we've done, how we survive all of these kind of attempts for eliminating us as an indigenous people, and how we can do in terms of building our educational character. Because I mean, Palestinians also are unique as a people in terms of culture, in terms of what education means to them, and how they educate themselves, and how they navigate these education spaces.
No problem. Thank you very much, Muhammad. So before we wrap up today's podcast, Muhammad, I just wanted to thank you so much for being a guest for us today. And it's been really a enlightening conversation. Took us in a journey from your early childhood and school and university, and also shed light on the current, genocidal war in Gaza and its impact on education, children, families, um, and of course there are many questions that are left unanswered that we will need to continue this conversation. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for listening to this two parts podcast with our guest, Dr. Mohammed Alruzzi. We hope you will join us for another podcast again soon. If you would like to know more about EENET's work, please visit our website www.EENET.org.uk. You can access almost 1,000 free resources on a wide range of topics related to inclusive education globally. EENET, the Global Education Network, has been working since 1997 to help document and share experiences of quality, inclusive education in low and middle-income contexts. We encourage critical reflection and support efforts to challenge norms and expectations. If you have any question or comment, please email us at info@eenet.org.uk or WhatsApp us on 44749 110-655. This podcast is a copyright EENET 2023. All rights reserved. The host was Ayman Qwaider, producer Ingrid Lewis, and editor Dan Lewis.